Ina mana, ina reo, ina reo rangatira mātina, koutou katoa. No mahare mai, welcome to this third episode of the Nelson City Council meeting that commenced on the 22nd of September. We have a very fulsome day today, plenty of items still to be addressed. I think just to make sure the Wairua is settled in the room, we'll all stand for tuia today, and I'll with karakia. Kia ora. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tuia te here tangata, ka runga te pau, ka runga te au, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Kia ora, welcome. Welcome to you all. You have an updated run sheet, I think, on your table. We'll try our very best to stick to the run sheet, but that is going to be a little bit influenced about in terms of changes to what are the recommendations in the report. I've already been advised of some proposed changes from elected members. I also have some changes that I'm going to be wanting to make to some of the recommendations as we go through. Unfortunately, the IT at my house last night was very uncooperative, and I said to Robin, I'm not sure if that's because Fowl House is completely full of teenagers who are here for a sports tournament, and the internet was crashing because it was just under so much use in our street. I'm not quite sure what was happening, but I haven't been able to email through those changes, but we'll work our way through them. So welcome to you all, and welcome to those of you who are joining us on Zoom today, and welcome to the staff, and particularly warm welcome to Ali Boswick, who is here to speak on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce regarding the holding company matter that's on the agenda today. And we will start with public forum. So kia ora, Ali, welcome to our meeting. I think it is quite auspicious that one of the people that I first started electioneering with back in 2007, and then sat here in this room, and we signed that declaration on the same day as here for my last meeting. So kia ora, Ali.
Kia ora. I had the same thought actually when I was walking in here, so it does feel like it's an era, I think is what they call it. Completing the circle, possibly an epoch. I don't know the difference. Kia ora. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And I appreciate that this has been on the agenda a couple of times. And I really just wanted, I'm going to be very short today. I don't have a lot to say, and I know you've got a very long day. But I'll start by saying that the Chamber has supported the proposed holding company since its first discussion, and we continue to have that view. And in summary, as we understand it, there are key points for us are that it's access to cheaper financing, and we think that's a prudent thing to look at. And appreciating that debt is always going to be required. We've got some significant investment that's coming up in terms of the Science Tech Precinct, the runway extension. There's going to be a need for more money to do these things. And if you can actually provision that debt in a way that's less impactful on everybody, then that makes perfect sense. And particularly at the moment, I mean, you just look at what's happening in the UK today in Europe in terms of uncertain economic times. I don't think we can be too blasé or too glib about how much money is going to cost us in the future. So I think number one for us, that's a key priority. Also, the fact that the port at the moment can't actually access that cheaper funding, it just seems to be, I appreciate there's a legal reason for that, but the fact that some of the key economic infrastructure for the region, as I said, the Science Tech Precinct, is going to be located at the port, and that's such a huge part of our economic ecosystem. If they can access cheaper funding, we think that's a really important thing for them to be able to do. There's a financial return to the community, and then that's not the be-all and end-all, but it's important. If we can actually alleviate the burden on our ratepayers, we think that's a really good reason to do it as well. And you know, as a chamber, we have a constituency of the business community, but they're essentially people and ratepayers. That's who they are. So any way that we can alleviate that debt, we think is a really good one. But I think that one of the key messages that I want to give today is actually the holding company in our mind is just one piece of a jigsaw in terms of the message it sends. And from a chamber perspective, we've got a regional remit. We're Nelson Tasman Chamber of Commerce. That's who our members are represented by, and that's the region that we deal to. And we believe wholeheartedly that regional agreement and unity is actually important for a vast number of reasons, not least of which to attract and continue to attract central government funding. in terms of investment in economic development opportunities for Nelson and Tasman, we know we haven't always hit the mark. And part of the fact that the holding company hasn't been supported by both of its shareholders of those two key economic aspects of our region sends quite a confused signal, I think, to central government. And it doesn't give us an opportunity to leverage other funding. It's also quite interesting, if you look at it, that one shareholder supported it unanimously, I believe. I haven't looked at the figures actually, so I might be not saying the truth there, but they supported it when the others supported it in part. So you could say actually the majority of the shareholders supported it. So we've got this strange weighting of effect of the vote that was taken in that regard, and I think that's something to be considered. And I think that but the fact that we haven't attracted regional economic funding in any substantive way through provincial growth funding and the previous mechanisms that were there put in place by central government has been because we haven't had that regional strategic purpose. I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson now, only for a second or two. But back in the early 2000s, Industry New Zealand established the MRI, the Major Regional Events Initiative. Now, in this region, there was several projects put forward. I was part of one. We were unsuccessful. It was a creative project, didn't quite have the mana at that time that hopefully it would have today. But the project that was put forward was to support the fishing sector, and it was for $2 million. The region couldn't come together to support that in a way that actually attracted that funding, and we lost it. So that was back in 2000, and that was because of the lack of regional unity. Now we've got a really good opportunity through what's happened post-COVID. We've got Project Kukri in place. We've got a much stronger strategic view across the wider Nelson Tasman region, and we can use that to our benefit and to our best effect. By not supporting, by both shareholders not supporting this, it does send, as I say, I think, a confused message. And why is that important? I think you know, and I know, and we hear it a lot, that Nelson Tasman is actually trailing economically. Statistically, we hear it all the time. It's not the most buoyant place in comparison to others, and we need to do the best that we can to change that. And you might wonder why a Chamber of Commerce is so interested in that. Well, it's because actually, as I said before, our mission is strong business, strong community, strong region. If our region isn't economically strong, our community is not healthy and happy, our businesses won't thrive. It's just that simple. So we feel that this is a really important piece in that jigsaw. And I think that actually, while we're sitting in this opportunity to change that, I think it's something that you should probably consider, maybe with that slightly different lens. And as I say, I don't really want to talk for too long, but I will just leave you with my 3 summing up points, which I put in bright yellow so I can see, because my eyesight's just getting worse and worse. But I think in summary, risk is inherent in everything that we do. Every activity we undertake has got an element of risk. From everything I've read, the risk in this is perceived to be low. I haven't seen anything that would make me think it's not. I may have missed something, in which case I'm happy to be proven wrong. The financial benefits, I think, really do outweigh the risk that's there. And I think that regional unity and strategic intent would be really well served if you actually proceeded with this. That's it.
Thank you, Ellie. I'll just see if there are any questions for you. Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mayor Rachel, and thank you, Ellie, for your presentation. We always enjoy you coming before us.
It's nice.
Ellie, just so I can just get some more thoughts from you. What is your understanding of uncalled capital and what will be used for in this instance?
I think from, as I say, everything I've read, I'm not an expert on this at all, is that the uncalled capital is sitting there in case of it's needed at some future point. The risk was deemed to be low for that happening, and also it doesn't actually affect your opportunity to borrow. It doesn't sit on your balance sheet. So while it sits there, I don't see it as a different risk from the fact that we already own the port and the airport. If anything happens, as shareholders, we're responsible for that. I don't see how there's a difference. It kind of almost just formalises that in some way.
And what is it used for? What would it be used for?
Oh, I have no idea specifically what it would be used for.
The uncalled capital.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Ellie? No, I think it's a really clear submission, Ellie. I want to thank you and the Chamber. Oh, hang on, we do have a question. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor, through the chair. Kia ora, Ellie.
Kia ora.
Nice to see you. Thanks for your presentation. You talked in your presentation about it being financial return to the community and alleviating debt to the ratepayers, and I'm just wondering how you see that happening.
I think from the reports that I've read, and again, I haven't been as close to this as you have, quite, I don't have the time to read all of your agendas, is the fact that actually it is going to save money. So the return, I think it was about an $800,000 potential return, going up to about 2 million is what I read. So I believe that that is going to help the ratepayers. If that's money that doesn't have to be spent on debt or doesn't have to be spent on other things and actually is returned, I think that makes perfect sense.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think that's the end of the questions. Ellie, thank you very much for coming in today, and thank you for the work that you and the Chamber are doing. Your comments around the importance of regional unity are really well made, and certainly from my perspective, that has been a focus of making sure that that is strong. While I've been sitting in this seat, the achievement through Project Kokiri is delivering dividends already, and it's only possible when we work collaboratively, and you've been a key part of that process. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you. Good luck with the rest of your deliberations today. I wish you well.
Thank you. We're now going to go backwards on the agenda to hopefully go forwards, but we'll see how we go. We're going to item 11 on your agenda, and that is the Alma Turner Library ceiling tile item. And we adjourned that matter on, I think it was Thursday. So I will invite Nikki and Rebecca coming to the table. They're supported by Lucy and Joel if we have any other questions. And I also see Malcolm is here as well, because we do have some questions around health and safety and risk management. So I'll hand across to Nikki and Rebecca, and we left last week with seeking some further information, so you might hopefully have got that for us today.
Good morning, everyone. Through the Mayor, yes, back on the topic of the Alma Turner Library ceiling tiles, there were a number of questions which were asked prior to the adjournment last week. So the first question was, when did we find out that the tiles had heating? It was identified that there would be implications for the budget in September and October 2021. And it was just as we had a resignation in staff from the property team. We believe that it was understood prior to that there was heating involved in the tiles, but that was when it was confirmed by a consultant, was September, October 2021. For the health and safety aspect, we were aware that the ceiling tiles were similar to Civic House, and that is why the budget was put into the long-term plan in 2021, but Pat will speak to those points. And reporting to governance, the budget for the project was under $250,000, so therefore no project sheet is developed for the quarterly reports. And there appears to have been no discussion with the Community and Recreation Chair on this matter either.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for covering those matters off. I'll go to the Chief Executive, who's going to indicate he's got some further commentary on this matter.
So at the prior to the adjournment, I was asked to comment on the health and safety implications of the ceiling tiles. So we're still doing a research into what has happened. I mean, we still have to report back to Audit, Risk and Finance with a detailed timeline, similar to that which we did with Civic House. But unfortunately, staff illnesses and flood response meant that we just could not turn that around in this triennium. So first time that I think that the issue with the tiles was raised that we've discovered so far, it was 2018, when it was reported that some of the ceiling tiles were loose and they needed refixing. But the first time I can remember them coming up was around about June 2020, when it was started to be talked about the weight of that some of the tiles were heavy and the seismic bracing needed addressing. But the message was there were no immediate health and safety risks identified. So money was put in the LTP 21 to 31 for the year 21-22, $200,000 to remediate the ceiling tiles. And then, as Rebecca has identified, that as we started to get that work underway, the issue with the heating and the ceiling tiles meant that the work was deferred to 22-23. It was only when the seriousness of the issue with the ceiling tiles in Civic House was identified in May 2022 that we suspected that we would have the same issue in the library, and diverted very quickly to have a look at those tiles. And one of the first things we did was take some out and weigh them, and that's when we found that one of the tiles, we did a random sample, but one of the tiles we weighed was 11 kilograms, and I think another one was about 9.5 kilograms. Much heavier than we were expecting. So that has been our top priority since then, has been the library tiles. But I do need to put this in context. Those ceiling tiles have been in that building for over 25 years. The risk hasn't changed, and that tile grid and structure has withstood several major earthquakes during that time. When we talk about risk, it's a combination of the consequence of something happening and the probability of something happening. And the probability of something happening, because it will require a major earthquake to shake those tiles loose, is very, very low, which means that the risk is, the overall risk is not high. Well, is not as high as one would expect. Our own initial assessment, based on the Brand's guidelines at the time, meant that by a close margin, the library could stay open. But there's also, I think, as Malcolm said, there's also a test of does this answer feel right? How does your gut feel? And I'll come back to that part of the decision. New MB guidelines that have been released subsequent to that date are even clearer. The building could stay open, and what's more, we suspect we probably have up to 25 years to fix the problem. We took a more conservative approach to the closure. The weight of the tiles, an 11 kg tile, is not insignificant if it fell. We have a lot of young people use that library, a lot of elderly people use that library. The consequences of a tile of between 9 and 11 kilograms falling on someone would be horrendous. So although the probability was very, very low, we took a more precautionary approach. Other factors was there's nowhere, large parts of the library, there's nowhere to drop, cover and hold. We could have posted warnings, but many customers would not have understood that risk. Some of our customers can't read yet. Some of them, English is their second language. So this was not like a workplace where staff can be well informed of the hazard and understand the risks, and make sure that they understand how to drop, cover and hold. So we took a more conservative approach to closing the library. And I think that was the right approach. And I think we have acted very quickly in terms of responding to once we knew what that risk was, and working hard to get those tiles repaired or replaced or find an alternative solution. And I think that the speed with which Serena set up a pop-up library, we managed to stabilise some of the tiles and establish a pop-up library was to be commended. And I know the librarians are working hard to provide an impressive range of services there. Happy to answer questions, Madam.
Thank you. All right, I'll open for questions. Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mayor Rachel, and through to our Chief Executive. Thank you for that report. It's reassuring, and it's good to know have the clear picture. I'm just wondering, you mentioned alternative solutions and reopening at another site. Have you considered the vacant site in Bridge Street that was previously occupied by the warehouse stationery? So one of the reasons that we haven't provided a recommendation today is
is we don't have all the information on the library. What the report talks about is the structure. So we're getting the DSA for the tiles, the detailed seismic analysis, but we're also redoing the one for the structure itself, which I think was 2013, which put the library at 42%. And we know that the guidelines have changed since then, so there is a risk that 42% could now be lower. We think that if that DSA for the structure is still above 34%, our preferred option would be to get on and fix the ceiling tiles. It's capital work, and we can do it relatively quickly. If that DSA is below 34%, then I think that we then do need to look at leasing options. But it's more than just leasing a space. We have a large office as part of the library. The warehouse stationery has no office. We would have to build offices, and none of this would be capital because this is us making improvements to a rental building and would effectively be operating budget. So we hope to get that DSA at the end of October. If this wasn't the last meeting of council, we would have probably held off for another 3 or 4 weeks with this report. But that's why we haven't provided a recommendation, because the recommendation would have had to be so staged. But we have worked with Councillor McGurk to provide them with some words. They were the words that was actually in the draft report at one stage, but then we took out again. But that's the uncertainty, and that's why when we would like to stay in our existing library site, but that DSA on the structure will most likely decide which way we go.
Just before I go to the Deputy Mayor, normally those reports come in 2 stages. They come with a draft and then they come with a final. Have you received the draft DSA? Because usually you'll get that sometime before you get the final.
Through the chair, no, the timeline for the draft DSA was expected middle of October. Was the date that we always expected it. That has been pushed out a couple of weeks because of the flood work that the engineers were needed to be involved with. So we are expecting the draft now at the end of October,
Right.
And we would provide feedback quickly to get that to a final.
All right. So in the timeline, Rebecca, when's the final? When are you expecting the final?
We would expect the final the start of November.
Start of November.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Kira, just a few questions. So just trying to pick up on the timeline. You said words along the effect of issue was first raised in 2018 because of loose tiles. And then you mentioned later that the chance of them coming loose was very slim. So I'm just trying to reconcile those 2 comments.
So my second comment was that those ceiling tiles had been there for 25 years and withstood major earthquakes. As I said at the start, we still haven't done our full research into the timeline. So that part of the answer is still very provisional, and we will be providing a more detailed response to the committee, Audit, Risk and Finance Committee.
But there were loose tiles raised in 2018, or you're not sure?
Yes, there were loose tiles, but apart from that, I don't know more about what that issue was. I think what was happening was that as maintenance work was being done on the surfaces, that sometimes you have to take tiles out to do that work, and sometimes those tiles were not being refastened. But that's I think. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Just looking at the time frame on pages 105, 106. So if work was to be done, adding those weeks together, and that would assume no slippage, it would appear that the soonest it would be fixed would be end of July next year.
Through the chair, we have a best case scenario. If the detailed seismic assessment comes back as over 34%, as 17 weeks to April 2023.
And if it's not best case scenario?
If it's not best case scenario, we would need to consider additional design for structural engineering, which would increase that potentially by 6 weeks. plus a change to the building consent. So possibly an extra 10 weeks on top of that.
Nikki?
So through the chair, one of the things that we have been investigating with the work is actually doing it as a phased reopening, so that, I think what Rebecca's talking about is the whole thing being reopened, but actually when we actually get the detailed seismic assessment and overlay that with the ceiling tiles, we may be able to open sections earlier.
And so in your next report that's going to come back, will that provide a full analysis of options such as cost benefit ratios for investing into this building, looking at alternatives? I know Councillor Courtney has suggested renting. However, yes, it's OPEX, which is not optimal to increase OPEX. There might be other council facilities, for example, that we could use, however. So will that report back enable that level of assessment and option consideration by the elected members?
Through the chair, yes, that was the intention, that there'd be kind of the do nothing, live with it, renting elsewhere, and, making the investment in the building. And I think a lot of that is driven by what that DSA tells us. But yeah, there are multiple options. There could be opening multiple smaller sites. And as you say, using council facilities. So it would be a full option report.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, the CE mentioned providing words to Councillor McGurk that had come from an original draft. Is there further information that perhaps the rest of us need to see before we hear those words from Councillor McGurk?
No, it was a very initial draft of the report that was prepared, and we had quite a discussion about what to recommend. Should we put up a subject to the DSA being above 34%, that there being no serious structural flaws, that we get on and bring the ceiling tiles up to 67%. But we thought that the council would want to have the opportunity to consider other options, and so in the end we left it as a receiving report with
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to just test out and particularly, and I raised this, I've raised this on a number of occasions as we've gone through the process of having to address at short notice these, as elected members, the issues in relation to ceiling tiles. I want to better understand how the health and safety assessment has occurred, in the sense of, and I'll do the comparison. So if I walk out into the foyer out there, we've got metal grid system now holding up those ceiling tiles. They're not, they don't have heating in behind them. They're somewhere between 7.2 to 7.9 kilos. But at 7.2 to 7.9, they're considered to need a mitigation to address health and safety risk, because there's nowhere to drop, cover and hold. And I'm just I can't quite reconcile how the Alma Turner Library didn't get the attention, almost priority attention, in the thinking about health and safety, given the issues that we've just discussed, that you had a structure with a known risk. It actually became even more acutely risky as you started to look at, well, certainly had it consequentially by September, October 21, when you started to go, well, not only have they got their ceiling tiles with heating, so they're going to have a weight contribution with that. You've got nowhere in most of the library to drop, cover and hold. You've got a very vulnerable community that we've just talked about, and I just can't reconcile how that risk has been assessed to be left until without getting to the point where it was a priority, almost ahead of Civic House, to be honest, because really when you layer up all of those matters, and then you put the issue of, and yes, in case of Civic House, we also look at the fact that this building plays a significant role in terms of we need people around for emergency events to be able to operate. But the library also plays a critical function in terms of social cohesion within our city. It's our most used, I believe, most used, or has been until we got to COVID, public facility. So from a numbers perspective of number of people, the vulnerability of people, the inability to shelter, can you just talk us through how that didn't reach a priority point of assessment, similar to what you've done for Civic House, where you were looking at floor by floor, what the mitigations were, and also how it didn't make it onto the audit risk agenda for reporting? I understand it didn't make it onto a capital project because it was under the dollar limit, although we did actually, I think, provide some additional funding and bring that up to 400? I'm trying to remember now. No, we didn't, because we didn't have that information. So can we just try and give me some rationale? Because I think the reason I'm asking these questions is because we do, as elected members, have a responsibility. We are officers under the legislation, and you have a responsibility. Your responsibility is to ensure that the systems that are in place in the organisation are acting appropriately to ensure that we meet our obligations under the Health and Safety at Work Act. So it's appropriate that we probe these matters, which is one of the reasons the reporting function is so important. That piece of legislation operates on a system where the officers have the ability to do this testing, but it's impossible for the officers to do the testing if there is no reporting. It relies on all of those parts of the system operating. So I wonder, Chief Executive, if you could just run us through how that, given the profile and the issues, that didn't get attention in your senior leadership team meetings, because these matters have been, June 2020 is about right from what I can see, that our Maternal Library was known at a risk, but it wasn't the subject of the kind of discussions that Civic House was.
So that was a wide-ranging question. So one of the reasons, in June 2020, it was drawn to our attention that there was a need to start doing something with the ceiling tiles in Civic House, in the library. It was not flagged at that stage as critical as we now know. And that it wasn't until we realised how serious the ceiling tile issue was in this building that we then drew the link to the library. And yes, I think it's also probably just important to bear in mind other things that were going on at the time. I just want to talk about 3 other things that were happening during that time. One of those is staffing issues. So in 2018, when I started here, property asset management was sat with community facilities. I think they had 2 staff that looked after all council buildings and facilities, the marina and the campgrounds. The first issues we started to address was a lack of asset management in our infrastructure areas, and then we turned to our property teams and our parks teams. We established a marina manager position and brought the marina in-house, which took that away from that community facilities team. And sometime round about the start of 2020, we transferred asset management of commercial buildings to a property management team. And the plan was to strengthen that team and increase numbers. Unfortunately, the manager of property services left in August 20 and was replaced in May 21. An asset planner started in March 21, left in November 21, and you met the new replacement last week. The strategic property officer started in April 21. The health and safety advisor was off sick for 6 weeks, around about October 21. And the project manager changed in about April 21 through a resignation. So that team is now fully resourced for the first time, I think, since we've established that team, which makes a huge difference to the way it can operate and the way it can act as owner of that building. And it's one of the few teams in the organisation that is fully staffed. During the same period, we had COVID-19. We had the first lockdown between March and May 2020. And during that time, the team was also very busy on rent relief applications. We went back into lockdown level 3 and level 4, August and September 21. And we had red traffic lights January to March 22. So while we managed to work from home with all our staff, or large proportions of our staff working full-time from home, our efficiencies are not what they should be. The other thing was, during that period, that team, which was woefully under-resourced, also dealt with other major issues which were not on the work plan at the time: the sale of the Totara Street property, the sale of the sale to Kaienga Ora, Strawbridge Square development, and an urgent purchase of a Hill Street property. So there was some prioritisation done. The advice we were being given in middle of 2020 was this wasn't urgent, and we put it in the long-term plan with the full intention of doing that work. As it turns out, the $200,000 that was put in, based on assessments at the time, was not accurate. So that, I think, is the answer to why this wasn't picked up earlier. In terms of response to Civic House, well, we had a head start on Civic House. The library was always 3 or 4 weeks behind, but the issues are different at the library. The solution that we have here for the high priority areas doesn't work in the library. It's bigger spans and different solutions are needed. Happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you, Pat. Look, I've got the questions aren't related to the work of the property team. I'm just absolutely so grateful for the work the property team's been doing and working through, a really big program, making great progress, and one of the things that we felt was important, which is why we developed the Strategic Property and Development Committee, was actually to support that work and make sure that this was a focus area for council. The issue that I'm raising is around the health and safety assessment of at 2020, when Malcolm is clearly reporting up Civic House, and you've got under 10%, and he's putting up options, he's looking at what you can do there, you've got that assessment. Elmer Turner Library is the reporting, and it's all public documents, I think they've been gone through, they've been available, is that there is no Elmer Turner, it doesn't address the risk around Elmer Turner. So those reports look at Civic House, but we have a risk in Elmer Turner Library where many of the mitigations that are proposed for Civic House won't work because of the inability to drop, cover and hold, and that's why there is nowhere to cover. And I'm really struggling to reconcile why that didn't get that attention, because I think if I look around the room here and think about from a governance perspective, that would have been of acute concern, and it is of acute concern to the elected members, and would have got that attention. I see them nodding to me to say, yes, it would have. It would have been something that they would have immediately run through that assessment and said, right, what have we got? Circumstances. We've got vulnerable users. We've got nowhere for them to cover. We've got heavy ceiling tiles above their heads. We need to act on that. So I'm just, that's the part that I'm finding quite difficult to sort of understand why that didn't get through, the system. And the reason I'm discussing this today is because I think we may have to contemplate that there is some work to do for the next, and is a high priority for the next audit risk committee to actually do some analysis to understand how we got to here without addressing, what I think, looking around this table, we're saying is, gosh, if you'd come to us and said, this is a scenario and we'd had that information in 2021, we would have immediately said, right, that's not something that we're prepared as officers to sustain. We'd like something done about that.
And so I quite agree, Madam Mayor, that if we had known about this 2 years ago, that we would have moved sooner, but we didn't. Hindsight is a wonderful planning tool. But what happened, and I'm not surprised that we didn't pick up, we didn't realise the severity of the problem. But even now, knowing the severity of the problem, both the risk assessments done that we would do under the MB guidelines and the Brands guidelines say we can keep the building open and we have 25 years to fix it. So in that we didn't know the full scale of the problem in the mid-2020, I can accept that the advice was that this was not an urgent risk. Yes, looking back, we should have, it would have been better if we had picked it up. But as I've tried to outline, other things were going on, and our staff were doing the best they could.
All right, I think I will, we've got to deal with this issue in some way today. So I have to say I'm left with a view that I do think we need to look at those health and that risk assessment, health and safety reporting and assessment, and that will be a matter that I'll raise with the audit chair. He already has this on his radar, and he will, as he said to the audit risk committee, be producing a report that he does as a handover to both the incoming audit risk committee, and he also sends a copy of that to through to Audit New Zealand. So I'll certainly be raising this issue with him, because I do think ceiling tiles, whether they're 7.5 kilos or 11 kilos, it's 7.5 kilos. They still, in my mind, deserve some urgent attention, even if it's to have the discussion to reach the conclusion and be very open about those risks, especially when they're public facilities. And so, this is not just about accountability to this table, but it's about accountability, in my mind, to the public. So we need to make sure that we're doing our best to have those systems in place. The issue that we've got today is that sitting with this report is, and Councillor Noonan's also been sending through her suggestions around how we could address this issue, which is to look for another facility for the library, another building. Councillor McGurk has sent through seeking to sign off the unbudgeted expenditure to get on and fix the work. So we've got now a range of options, and in the process of this report, this agenda coming forward, Councillor Noonan was diligently emailing about this issue, because she was very concerned, as I think probably as on behalf of that risk, and we were expecting to see a report with a budget allocation. So she said obviously there's been some discussions through the finalisation of the report to say, no, you weren't ready to bring that forward. But now we've got that information. There has been some discussions yesterday with Councillor McGurk around actually bringing that budget forward. So we've now got a range of elected members' views about how we solve this problem. So your options are do nothing and wait, leave it for the next council, propose that there is some looking for an alternative site, or put forward the unbudgeted expenditure. Now, it's going to take me some time as chair to try and navigate my way through all of those things, and I don't have a lot of time at my disposal today, so I'm looking for the elected members to assist in a collaborative way to try and actually do what we do best, right? So one of the things that I know this table is very good at is problem solving. I've got some excellent problem solvers at the table. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I think that while Councillor McGurk and myself have come up with some different solutions, and they're quite different, I think we're both trying to solve the same problem, which is actually trying to get some more services open. Listening and reading, I don't think we're going to be able to solve it. I think what we're going to need to do, potentially the best we can do, is to actually just ensure that the officers cover off in their investigations for the next council the options that both of us have actually considered, which is one was to go ahead and do the work, which was Councillor McGurk's suggestion. And mine was to look for alternative solutions in the city. Given that at the moment we have a resolution on the books that we're going to get a new library, which hasn't been turned over at this point, we're still working on that assumption. I think that the new council will need some very good information and very good reporting on the options that are in front of them. The two streams of work really is what the future of the library will be, which we now, I think, has a question mark over it. And secondly, getting those services before July next year. I think that's just too long. There may be some other options in the wind that may arise as people around the city realise the situation that we're in. So I'd like to keep it open for the staff to consider any options that arise and those that have been raised at the table. So if we could, whether we need to do any more or just minute it, I'll leave that for the elected members to consider. And leave it as wide open, but to get some really good reporting up for the next council with those two things: what we're going to do about the library and what are we going to do about the services.
Right, thank you. Can I just test, I'm just going to test with council, we're going to have a conversation because I think that's the best way to approach this one. So those of you on Zoom, hopefully this will work for you too. So just pop your hand up if you want to join the conversation. Can we agree between us that, and I hope this is, Serena, I'm going to ask this question with every expectation that it's going to be a yes, that we agree that our library services are absolutely critical community services that we must have access to. Yes? Yes, we do. We do. They're really important services. And we acknowledge the way the library team has worked so hard to continue to deliver those services under, some pretty trying times over the last couple of years. But the concept of having a pop-up library for an extended period of time, from my view, just doesn't cut it. Those services are too important. Any new library is still many years out. So I don't actually think the new development comes into the equation today. What comes into the equation is actually those services and those relationships and are just too important and too precious not to be, as fully operational as they can be as quickly as they can be. Would that be a reasonable presumption around the table? Anyone got a different view to that? All right, so what we need from the officers is some options around how quickly we can get back to as close to full operation as possible. So that's really the issue that we need to grapple with today. And one of those options is to get in there and get the work done to get it open. But we do have the risk here that the detailed seismic assessment may come back and say, well, actually, it's a bit more complicated than that because there's other structural weaknesses. We don't know that today. The other option is to say, well, actually, given it's going to be some time before there's going to be a construction of any new library, perhaps we should actually be treating our library services with a bit more care and actually finding some really nice premises for them for the next few years. But actually that might be the better option. So those are the sort of things that I think the elected members are going to need to turn their time to. I am going to put this on pause, this item, for a little bit, because I think this is one of the things that we probably need to just continue that conversation for a little bit longer today, not too long, unless you've reached a conclusion that actually what you want to do right now is to get in and just get that approve that budget for doing the strengthening work. If you're of that mind and say, no, that's the best option, then we can look at that item. So I'll go to Councillor Brand.
Thank you, through the chair. You mentioned that Mr. Brian sent through some ideas. We've heard from Councillor Noonan, but can we actually hear what Brian McGurk sent through?
We can, Robin. There's some resolutions that came through last night, so we can pop those up on the screen and then Councillor McGurk can speak to those.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor, and through you. Essentially, I'm in total agreement with what Councillor Noonan said, is that the current situation is, to me, is just untenable. We've got a half open, half closed library, and we've got staff working in, we've got a less than optimal situation. The option I put up there is basically unbudgeted capital, so it's $1 million to bring the building up to the 67% MBS for a important level 2 building, which the library is. But as you heard from the chief executive, the current rating is, I think, was it back in 2008, was at 42%. So that may change. So there is a proviso there that if it's over 34%, because you actually put in more, the cost to do it more than that is increasing. The next one is to get the officers get on with doing the preparation for a building consent and getting work underway to get the library up and running. It's capital expenditure, so it has less impact on the rates. If we go to OPEX, that is loaded straight onto the rates. So I think, what's the hire of a building, the fitting out, that's all that's all OPEX. This one is capital, so it has less fiscal implications. It doesn't actually resolve the long-term problem. Basically, this is just to get the library open and operating, and it gives us the time to deal with the longer-term issues. But the motive is this is probably, we can't unknow the problem. As the Chief Executive says, well, we now know it, we can't now unknow it. Now we know what we know, but this is a way of just actually mediating to a space to get the library up and running and back operating. It's not a long-term solution. That's for another day. This is just to get us over this current hurdle.
Thank you, Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, and through the chair. So the timeframe that Officer Rebecca, so I'm very rude this morning with my names and forgetting them. You said the timeframe, you said that's all waiting on that seismic report though, isn't it? The timeframes that you just explained prior about.
Through the chair, if the decision is made for the unbudgeted expenditure, we could start now. We could use the design and engineering for the building consent and get that part underway, which would mean that we would be starting the process. That first 6 weeks worth of process.
So that's about 6 weeks worth. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fulton.
I have a quick question. Apologies for lateness, and if this question's already been asked. In terms of replacing the ceiling tiles, so they're currently electric with the heating system through them, but could they be replaced with a cheaper solution and then you find an alternative heating like heat pumps or panel heaters on the floor? Like, do you have to replace the heating system like for like, or can you find a different heating solution?
Through the chair, if we did replace the heavyweight tiles with lighter tiles, we would need a replacement heating system. The replacement costs were included in the budget costs as options, and they tended towards the upper range of the budget costs, estimated costs.
Really? Okay. So heat pumps, putting in heat pumps is a temporary solution, because I completely support that, apart from the library is going to be demolished at some point into the future. So it seems like, even though it's capital, it seems like a massive investment in a building which is effectively going to become redundant at a later point in time. So so that's my concern, I guess, is there a more affordable way of heating the building in the interim?
Possibly. I've never seen the full, whatever the options were in the report before it went to senior leadership team. So the Deputy Mayor, I didn't have that report. We had a different report which just had this option. And Rebecca, thank you, made some changes to the report to put in the because I said we really do need to have some idea of numbers. Remember, it was between 1 and 2.5 million that is in the current report. Would elected members find it useful to actually be able to see these issues, that, just the detail around that today, or not? I just want to make sure that you've got the information that you need. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My resolution isn't up there, which was basically to ask the officers to immediately look for an alternative accommodation. Look, I don't know whether seeing any further information at this point, with the agenda that we've got going to 8 o'clock at night, and we should have finished this now, does concern me. I think probably the easiest thing to do is to actually give some direction to the staff to keep the options broad, so they can bring those back to the new council. They'll know by then they'll know the detailed seismic assessment details, and then can move on. I think what we're doing is trying to solve the problem without having all the information at the moment. And I think that as long as we get a report prepared for the new council, then they will have the information that we don't have today. I'm very reticent, as Councillor Fulton said, to put up to 2.5 million, and we find that prices creep on everything we do. So that's probably not going to be the end to a building that at the moment is not going to be there long term. And it's below the walkway. I mean, we've got all sorts of issues going on here. So I think it would be fairer to get a good report up for the new council with the information required. And I just wonder whether we just receive the report and all of the things in it are in this meeting are recorded in the minutes, or whether it's the desire of the current council to have a resolution that's a little bit that's under that, gives direction to the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Noonan. I'm going to go to Councillor Stanson next, but just before I do, there's additional clause that Councillor Deputy Mayor sent through that I'd like to add to whatever we decide today. So
Yeah, thanks. Look, I concur with Councillor Noonan, but I did just send through an additional resolution which basically states requests officers to review the events leading to the closure of Alma Turner Library and report to the Audit, Risk and Finance Subcommittee or its successor, because I think that's another part of the loop that would be good to have recorded here in the minutes. But I agree, we need to wait for all the information before making any substantive decisions.
thank you. Councillor Stanson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through the chair. So I believe that I heard from the CE that we're waiting on a detailed seismic report and that there is the possibility that it could indicate the building is, I think it's currently that the building may be below 34%. Is that correct?
What? Sorry, what I
Not
said.
that it is, but there's a possibility. I guess where I'm kind of going with it is that if it was below 34%, would that then there would be a chance that we're not able to reopen it in its current state. Is that correct?
It would depend on why it was below 34% and what it would take to get the structure back up above 34%. Sometimes that can be easy, sometimes that can be very, very hard. So, and so yes, there is a chance, and that's why we're doing that, to see whether it's worthwhile spending the money on the ceiling tiles if that's not the only problem with the structure of the building. But we don't know the answer to that yet at all.
That's great. I mean, I'm in agreement with Councillor Noonan and the Deputy Mayor that we don't have enough information to make a decision to be spending money on replacing tiles when we may get a report back showing that the earthquake risk of the building is significantly increased. So I think we need to get more information and then a really fulsome report outlining all of the options for the next council.
Thank you. Go to Councillor Laurie.
Thank you. I applaud Councillors Noonan and McGurk's passion and energy for trying to find a solution to this problem today, but I concur with Councillor Sanson. Just a bigger question for me, sort of bigger space picture, I guess. Obviously, when the tiles went in 25 years ago and people were lifting these 11 kilo things into place, we know with hindsight that wasn't a great idea. Do you think there are things we're doing right now which sort of echo that practice? Are there things we're doing right now that 25 years from now the council will be sitting in another chamber probably saying, you know, what were we thinking?
Was it a thinking out loud question, or
no? I did want to put it out there. I'll be honest, but
I'd like to say.
But are we always scanning for the things that 25 years from now we'll regret?
In the interest of time, I'm just going to answer that one to say, I think the expectation of our investment is that it's future focused, and it should be thinking about the future when we make those decisions about future generations, because this is debt funding a lot of this, and that becomes the next generation's issue to bear. And I guess that's what's sitting in my mind today is do we just do a kind of quick fix up with a kind of that'll sort it out kind of scenario, or do we actually take a more future focused approach to this? And I think that's the part that elected members, some around the table, are saying, look, actually, we need to see this in the context of not a ceiling tile issue. This isn't the answer to this problem. This is actually what is it that we care about and what is important to our community, and how do we actually make sure we look after both the people that work in the library and the people that come to the library and enjoy those services. And that's the issue here of what is best for the library, what is best for those services and best for our community. It's far more than a ceiling tile issue in my view. Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. Yeah, the sum of money is I've relied completely on the officer's advice. That's to deal with the immediate problem. Now, we can get into detail about heating and all the detail. This is just to get our library back up and operating for our community. And all this, future one. Look, these are decisions for a future council at a future time. This is just about, we have a problem and this is how we can solve it and gets our library open. But, we will still be left, I'll be quite candid, we'll be still left with a suboptimal, subpar library that will be subject to, there's a flood risk in the future. So we're going to have to deal with a new library at some stage. This is about solving the immediate problem. At the moment, we've got a half open, half closed library, and our community deserves it open. Now, to me, the other stuff I think is just conflating the issue. But anyway, the 1 point, just the one over $1 million is to solve the immediate issue, and it's debt funded. It has the least impact on our ratepayers.
Right, so we're going to have to get some progress on this to whether we're going to say we've got nothing moved or seconded. I'll go to the deputy mayor, and then we're going to have to try and transact this matter. And Councillor Sanson, would you like to come back with further options?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to clarify with Councillor McGurk's recommendation, what is the issue that is being solved? If Councillor McGurk could just clarify, that would be helpful.
It's the ceiling tiles, and there's the proviso there that if the issue is bigger than that, well, there's it's got to be 34%. As we heard from the chief executive, is that it may be an easy fix to get us over the 34%, but if it's not, we'll have to look for another option.
I think you'll go to the deputy mayor.
Thank you. Look, I've got another resolution I've put forward, which is coming up on the screen now. It's basically requesting that full report back with the options analysis for the library, which includes service delivery options as well, because they are the two key elements. One's the capital side, one's the service delivery side. Look, I just think based on the discussion I've heard, based on the information I've read, there is some information. It is coming back. It is imminent, and it just feels prudent to wait till that information is there so that the next decision makers around the table can have that fulsome information and that fulsome discussion around both the capital and the service side. So I've got that resolution, and then my other one is the audit risk and finance, the review and the report to audit risk and finance. And I'm going to move the three resolutions in total, the receiving, the reporting back with options, and the review and reporting to audit risk and finance.
And I'll second that, thank you.
It's been moved by Deputy Mayor, and in the moment of time, Councillor Fulton was just a few seconds ahead of you, Councillor Noonan, so I'm going to take please don't even get upset about that. I have to put a name. Very quickly, because we've got to catch up 15 minutes now.
Intention of the service delivery options is that allow us to look at other buildings. Is that your intention? So you would expect that to come back, because I think that's actually really important. My preference is if we're going to spend $1 million, we find another building which we know we're going to keep and spend $1 million upgrading that to be a temporary library, and then it can hopefully have another future after the new library's built. So my preference is we look at alternative locations.
Yeah, my anticipation would be service delivery options would depend on what the DSA says.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, so that's been moved and seconded. I appreciate the efforts to try and move this along. I think all elected members read this report and went, that's not going to be really get us to where we need to get to. We appreciated the report, but we can really see that this is having an impact on our community. Councillor McGurk?
Well, yeah, I've got reservations anyway. I'd be interested to know if we're asking this, when's this going to come back? And meanwhile, we have a substandard, we have a library that's not delivering its services. And this to me is a bit like, we've got an immediate problem, let's solve it. I would see this as the second stage after my resolution, is if it doesn't come back, these are the options that we look at. I think, with all due respect, we've jumped forward and we haven't actually dealt with the immediate issue. And meanwhile, our community doesn't have a library or doesn't have a full services of a library. And so maybe I have some advice about how long, when this is likely to happen.
Let's debate now. Ms Harrison's coming back to the table.
So through the chair, I think there would be a council meeting about the 10th of December or something like that. I think the intention would be to bring it back to that particular meeting.
Right, thank you. Now we're going to have to move this along. I'm going to do a little bit more conversation. We were sort of in debate, but I'm just going to allow a little bit of flexibility on standing orders. So Councillor McGurk is suggesting he could take one of his clauses and pop it in there, his clause, and then if the outcome was that we weren't above 34, that then we go and look at the options. But I'm not sure
if we get, I'm relying on the officers. It's I've asked for just 1.08 capital expenditure to deal with the tile issue, and there are some provisos there. Now, if that's as a result of the DSA, that's going to be a bit more difficult. I think then is probably the time to look at other options. But at the moment, I'm keen to get the library open. And if the report's going to come back in December, we talk about the Christmas New Year period, the Great Nelson shutdown. It's going to be February before anything happens. If we take my option, we probably have these staged open. We could have a library back up and running by April.
All right, well, council is going to be minded to do that. I am going to have to then get the options that are in the report to come here, because in order to make decisions at this table, you do have to have the options in front of you to make a valid decision. And I still need to make sure that we are trying to do that. I don't know whether you've had a copy of that report, Councillor McGurk. Oh, that's great. I haven't been provided it as mayor, so I am really at a loss. So I haven't got
Just to be clear, I haven't had the final report. I've had the DSA report, the Becker report. The draft one that's attached to
to what's here. But how did you arrive at 1.something million?
It was the advice from the officers.
Right. Well, I haven't had the privilege of that advice to know what was in the options and what wasn't in the options. So that makes it very difficult for me to chair this item. So I'm going to now adjourn it, and we're going to move on. And I'm going to have that, try and catch that up over my morning tea break, which never seems to be a morning tea break when we have council meetings. So we can try and sort out where we've got to. There are some things that are important when you're spending public money that you do need to make sure that you cover off the requirements under the Act. And I think we're skating dangerously close to being forced into a position which is really uncomfortable for all of us of having to make knee-jerk decisions, and that isn't a good place to be. Right, so we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, and that is Civic House Refurbishment Project. You've got a team, welcome back. We are page 280 of your agenda, item 17. You're ready, Rebecca.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to revisit the decisions related to the Civic House and Post Office Savings Building refurbishment project. A business case was presented to Council on the 11th of May 2021 requesting decisions on the refurbishment of Civic House project. The recommendations were approved with some additional items being added at that meeting. A project team was established to undertake investigation into the buildings to understand the level of work required to be undertaken. It is recommended that the resolutions of that 11th of May 2021 meeting be revoked and a new business case be developed, which considers the many situational changes that have occurred since the budget was set in 2020, including a number of key issues as outlined in points 4.31 to 4.47 of the report. There were some questions that were received by staff from Councillor Noonan, which I can speak to now. The first question was what reporting to governance had happened since 11th of May 2021. There has been no information updates or decisions reports to council. A workshop was held on the 12th of May 2021, which provided an update of work undertaken since May 2020. There have been no status reports in any council meeting, either public or confidential, since May 2021. The second question was on how the work completed lines up against the approved long-term plan budget. The budget for 2021-2022 financial year was $1.1 million. The annual expenditure for that year was $371,000. $290,000 of that was for work completed by Becca, and half of that being for structural engineering and the detailed seismic assessment. The remainder being used for other consultancy for architecture, flood reporting, condition assessments, fire reports, and other information to enable the progress to the workshop held in May 2021. Work since May 2021 has focused on concept designs for strengthening. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you, Councillor Noonan, for sending through those questions before the meeting. Appreciate that. Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, thank you. Was the business case that came forward in May 2021 a better business case or followed that methodology?
Through the chair, I don't believe it was.
Okay, so because I guess what I'm trying to understand is how we had a business case, and then at 4.4 you outline a number of elements that it says weren't included in the previous business case, including seismic strengthening and earthquake-prone building elements, etc. So I guess I would have thought, especially when we're talking sort of $25 million, that there would have been a full understanding of the structural requirements, if nothing else, of the building we're seeking to refurbish. So how did that not, how was that information not within that previous business case?
So through the chair, my understanding was that we were trying to get put forward a number in time for the long-term plan process, and we were just using a square metre rate from a comparable upgraded building in Wellington that was provided by Becca. So it was simply, the number of square metres times a square metre rate. So
okay, thank you. So do we now and I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, this is just a slight sideways question. Do we now use the better business case methodology for all capital projects or all vertical ones?
So I'll answer that one, Madam Mayor. So certainly the intention is in line with the recommendation from the Green Meadows report that major vertical infrastructure like this would go through a better business case process. And that would be the process that we would follow from now.
Okay, and so are we confident that the list of inclusions is going to take everything into account that needs to be taken into account?
Can I respond to that one, Madam Mayor? Some other things that we will have to take into account that have changed since that initial business case was done is the way we work. Because of COVID-19 restrictions, working from home has become much more the norm, and we're looking at the fact that we now have a hybrid working model of working in the building, and that realistically we probably only need to design a building to accommodate perhaps 60% of the staff that were working in the building in 2020. Another thing is local government reforms, Three Waters reforms and RMA reforms. I presented this to you in a paper, a confidential paper in early June. but the number of staff could reduce from between 30 and 80 as a result of those reforms. We're also waiting for the future for local government reforms to see what that might bring, and also sea level rise projections is another thing that has impacted the longer term viability of this building. I think you'll recall that we had planned to raise the floor level here by 0.5 metre. So those are things that would also have to be part of that business case process. Things that have changed quite dramatically on top of the capital, the estimates as well.
So if I can just follow up, so taking all of those things into account, and of course, it's still quite a dynamic space, those reforms. Well, you know, future for local government is at the review stage, not the reform stage yet. We don't know where that will go. Even with the Three Waters reform, those people would need to be located somewhere, and would you be looking at, you know, would co-location with council be a helpful move to make, or proposal to support that collaborative working between the council and the water services entity staff who are here. But then taking into account that as was identified in May 2021, that staffing accommodation is, I think, the most critical issue for staff. And, you know, that was certainly reinforced to us in May. And of course, with the seismic and ceiling issues, that's become a bigger concern for staff. So how is this balanced, and, you know, are short-term and long-term options going to be looked at?
Yes, I think so, and also perhaps more flexible ownership options as well. But yes, we have to accept the fact that the next few years in terms of local government are going to be quite dynamic in terms of the change that's going on, and we don't know the answers, and we're not in control of our own destiny. So whatever answer we come up with has to be scalable. You know, future for local government could see more work come our way. As you say, there could be co-locating, but if it doesn't, I don't want to find that we spent $2 million refurbishing a floor that is now we're struggling to find a tenant. There's a whole lot of issues that have to be put in the mix, and yes, that could. There will be a variety of solutions in play.
Thank you. And just my final question is, as part of discussions with JLL recently, who I know are doing some other work for us, they had been doing a lot of assessment work around changing workspace requirements with working from home, and they'd noted that floor space wasn't necessarily reduced. So are we going to be looking at, I guess, you know, beyond our own? I know we've done a survey of staff, but are we going to look at other best practice guidance around future working requirements? And then what's possibly a second question, but I said I was on my last one. Are we going to have discussions with Tasman District Council around their staffing requirements?
So through the chair, I'll treat that as one question. We will be looking externally. So this list here is but not limited to. So there will be a variety of discussions externally, and we'll be looking to use a proper property specialist, external property specialist that has a good understanding of office, you know, space around New Zealand to help us with the business case. And yes, I envisage that we'll be speaking to Tasman District Council as well, given that they're in a similar situation with their building.
Thank you.
Very quickly, I'm running out of time.
The other thing we're also looking at is that with this being such a major project, there would be a governance group established that would be involved exactly as we have with the library project, so that this would be a much more closely aligned process.
Well, thank you. Actually, after having heard from our consultants over the Green Meadows report the other day, I think one of the things that I've taken from that in relation to this project, the library project and many others, is that actually having somebody external sitting on that governance group would be a very good move. I'll go to Councillor Noonan, and then I've just got a couple of questions? I do want to break for morning tea in 5 minutes, so if we haven't finished this item, we'll break. Now to Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question is, looking at what we're revoking and just covering off whether some of those things, clause 3 was notes that the following renewals will be prioritised ahead of the overall refurbishment due to asset end of life or safety concerns. The first one being tower block roof. Has that been completed? Has that work been done? Because that was a complete we've moved everybody off the 6th floor because of that risk. Has that been done?
So through the chair, no, that work hasn't been done and 6th floor is still vacant.
Okay, and the ventilation, heating and boiler system, so that both those pieces have not been done as
No.
yet? Okay, so if we revoke this clause, then that safety work won't be done. So I'm a bit concerned that work needs to be done anyway, and the budget was there for that, was it not?
Oh, yes, it was, Councillor. And if you think about the timeline we're looking at when we made that decision, that was made in May 2021. We prioritised health and safety for the tower block roof, and then later discovered that actually that was such a serious issue when it finally got reported. Well, not reported, didn't get reported. We got it's under 20%. We'd already prioritised even without having that knowledge, but with that knowledge on top of that, it just makes it so, that was a very critical element to that work. So I don't understand why it hasn't happened.
So it would not, is it taken care of in the resolution? If we get rid of this resolution, that work won't be done, is that right?
So through the chair, the work on the roof building, so the rework, well, we've done the working on the design, but if you revoke this resolution, I mean, that work will need to be put on hold because of the fact that, when you're looking at the business case, potentially selling this building or something like that, you wouldn't necessarily invest in that work because someone else may well pull the top of the building off and put apartments up there with glass.
Okay, well, I need to think about that. The other two clauses were the requesting the Chief Executive to provide a further report in Council in relation to project management, budget, quality and time, and scope prior to the project commencing. And the 5th clause requests the Chief Executive to provide a further report with regards to appropriate levels of earthquake strengthening. So am I to believe that if we revoke this, none of that work will be done at this point in time?
Through the chair, that work will be done in the development of the new business case. It would form part of that.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. I have some major concerns about that, which I'll state right now. The other thing I would like to query, the tone of this report gives me the impression that we're going to leave the building. I might be wrong, but that's just the tone that I'm taking from this. But is it okay to leave a building in a state that is not safe? And over what period? And in the meantime, we've got people that can't use the 6th floor. I don't know what part of the budget it costs to replace that roof structure. But if they replace the roof structure, my understanding is that everyone can go back to the 6th floor. Is that the only thing restraining people from going back to the 6th floor? Do we know?
So through the chair, it would be that and the ceiling tiles on the 6th floor.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. I'm pondering on this because the implications of revoking this amount of work is making me very nervous.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to go quickly to Councillor Laurie. Thank you.
Thank you. Given how much, as Pat was saying, how much the workplace has changed, the impact of COVID, the costs of refurbishing the building are now looking like $25.6 million. Has any more thought been given to the other opportunities that might be out there for someone else to repurpose this building for apartments, for us to sell it, for us to then look at doing something that was purpose-built, an exciting new 21st century civic house that doesn't present us with all the problems and the leaks of this civic house. Has that idea been re-examined or re-explored?
That's certainly what would happen through the business case process, which is why we're reluctant to spend money on the roof. The advice, the informal advice we've received is there's a fairly good chance that the roof will be ripped off and some penthouses put up there, or if it was going to, if the floor below was going to be adapted for apartments, they might want to put more vents up through the roof, and putting that through a brand new roof is quite destructive as well. So the advice was, if there's a chance you're going to sell the building, don't replace the roof until you know what that use is. So that's why we're keeping it open, because we think that there is a reasonable chance that we may not stay in this building.
So just before we go to the next question, I can see faces around the table giving me incredulous looks going, there's been advice given, but we haven't seen that again. So we're just getting to a really, sorry, I can see Councillor is doing her very best.
My mouth's like on the table.
I haven't quite finished.
I haven't
yet.
Sorry,
heard,
Madam Mayor,
I've
this was a
responded-
verbal conversation I had with a consultant. It was nothing more than that.
All
It was
right,
just
it's
a
a very
phone call. It was informal. There was nothing in writing. There isn't a report. We're not concealing it.
That's good to get that clarification. Councillor Laurie.
Thanks. So I would be very interested in exploring those opportunities, because, it feels to me that could be a fantastic path forward, not just for council, but for the city. And I really hope that we really do look into it and explore it from all the angles. Just picking up on something you said before, and that was the percentage of staff that we no longer need to accommodate. I missed that number. What was the number?
So what we've been doing is working through a process of meeting. We have a team working on this, and they've been working with each of our teams to see what their preference is, and in terms of hybrid working. And there's some people want to work in the building every day, and some people never want to come back. But the general rule of thumb is most people want to be in the building 2 or 3 days a week. And so if we were to say that these teams will work on this floor, and here's the day when all of their team must be in the building, and you've got to book a desk for the other day or two. We think that overall, that about 60% of our staff would be in the building on any one day. And when we need to understand, as the Deputy Mayor has pointed out, is this a permanent trend? But that's the rough number we're looking at the moment. We would probably have to allow a little bit more for growth, but then it's also, what do I give up for 3 waters and RMA reforms?
Right. And just with that business case, sorry, last question. With that business case, would, if we look at the possibility of moving, would that take into account the possibility of us moving to land that we already own?
I think it would look at land we already own, and also land that we may wish to purchase. I think we would be quite flexible about that.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a morning tea break just until the Minister arrives. I'm expecting the Minister McNulty at 1:45, and he's on a very tight time frame, so we'll need to be back at the table when the Minister arrives. If he's a little bit later, we'll take another 5 minutes, but we'll see how we go. Thank you. We've got quite a bit to work through here on this one. Oh, there's morning tea in Ruma Waimarama. Thank you. I was going to discuss that item, but if Councillor Sanson doesn't have it, I'll have to wait because I can't disadvantage an elected member from her decision-making role. I am trying, Councillor Courtney, to get decisions made. There's a few challenges today. I am trying my very best. Oh gosh, I am trying very hard. It's going to take a few minutes to get to Councillor Sanson. Can I suggest a 5-minute item? In the meantime, we're going to move further down the agenda and we're going to go to the discharge of encumbrance item, which is also one that Sven Orden is here to speak to. That is item 18 on your agenda. It is on page 288. And I'm going to take the item as read, ask if there are any corrections that need to be made to the report or any additions.
Through the chair, no corrections or
Thank
additions.
you. Do I have someone to move the recommendation?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor Deputy Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Courtney. It has been moved and seconded. Are there any questions on the report?
Page are we on?
We're on page 288 and we're doing the discharge of encumbrance. 288. Discharge of encumbrance, Nelson Tasman Housing Trust. Any questions? Very self-explanatory, this report, and it's a good step to assist more affordable housing development in our city. And I have to say, I am tremendously delighted this report is here, having been the having to have argued very hard to get Council of the Day to agree to sell this piece of land to Nelson Tasman Housing Trust for $1, but they were insistent that it had an encumbrance put on it as well in terms of the advice at that point. So I am delighted to see that encumbrance disappear. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. That's one item, one decision made today. Thank you. It's very progressive. All right. So I'll just make sure that Councillor Sanson, when you receive the information, can you just let me know? And obviously we'll need some time to read it, but perhaps we're going to be we'll talk through. So just let me know when you've got it, and in the meantime I'll try and move on to some other items. Perhaps we could go to the item 23, which is the approval of the Better Off funding proposal. It's telling me that it's page 530 of your agenda. That's a rather large number, isn't it? Oh gosh, it is too. 530. This is a reasonably self-explanatory report. You've seen this before. And it's really the last step in the process. So welcome, Ms McDonald. Are there any corrections or additions that you need to make to the report?
No, Madam Mayor, there are not.
Okay, we're taking this read. Are there any questions?
Happy to move.
Moved by Councillor Neil Stevens, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any questions? It's all very familiar to you. We spent quite a long time putting this together, so this is just the sign-off to approve the funding proposal. Councillor Laurie.
Thank you. I just wanted to check the funding for lighting the section of the Railway Reserve. Is that sufficient funding to put in lights that will retain in some way people's ability to observe and enjoy the night sky? And I ask this because I know it's an issue that increasing numbers of people are concerned about, and I've had a lot of correspondences about it.
Through the chair, look, I've talked to Mark Parfitt about this because I was aware that it was an issue, and she is saying that that will certainly be taken into account when they do the specs of the procurement for the lighting.
Thank you. Next question. The report, the timelines in the report seemed quite a lot further out than I remember them being for completion of the project, the full lighting of the Railway Reserve, if that's what happens. Why is it going to take so long? Because I understood it wasn't that complicated. Through the chair.
I'm sorry, I couldn't answer detailed questions about that project. I'd need to check with staff on that. I can email councillors after the meeting if that's all right about the timelines.
Sure. I mean, I think was it 2025? I think the report said that it wouldn't be completed until 2025, and that's quite a lot further out than I remember it being. Do you think there might be any room to bring those dates forward?
Through the chair, it would be a matter of looking at the resourcing needed, but it is in two stages. So one section is within our long-term plan, and this is another stage of that. So staff will have put it where there is capacity, but we can certainly we certainly want to do it as soon as possible because we know that the community has been waiting for this and wanting it for a long time.
All right, so we'll follow that up with the transport team and see if we can get some update outside the meeting. I don't think it's material to us signing off today, which is really to receive and approve. It's been moved and seconded. Any further debate? No, thank you. There's no debate. It's quite straightforward. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Yes, we'll go to the freedom camping item, which is, I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think we'll do the freedom camping item. Mr. White is on the screen and he's well familiar with the item. Page 539 of your agenda, it's item 25. This is a very procedural matter, just because there's a time frame. Mr. White, anything additional to add to the report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It is a procedural item that is required of council to review the freedom camping bylaw. Should be a reasonably simple decision.
Thank you. All right, somebody care to move? Thank you, Councillor Noonan. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor McGurk. Question from the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, just as part of that review for Nelson Tasman is a region for tourism. Just wondering if you will look at if there's any options in partnering with TDC on one bylaw. There are currently some quite different considerations in the respective bylaws, but discussions with TDC take place?
Thanks for the question through you, Madam Mayor. Definitely discussions can take place, and thanks for noting also that there are some quite different situations between the two regions that could make some parts of that a little bit challenging, but certainly we can have the discussions.
Thank you. Excellent. No further questions. Is there any debate? So we said this is the procedural process to meet the time frame. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. All right, let's pick another one now. We could go to some of the recommendations from committees, perhaps. We'd like to do those. So let's have a look at the recommendations from committees. And I think they are the recommendations in relation to the Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit and the Nelson Regional Sewerage Business Unit. And we do have members of those committees here, and I will go first in the agenda to, I believe it's Regional Landfill Business Unit first. I'll go to the Deputy Mayor, who is the chair of that group. Sorry, apologies. I'm just trying to find the page in the agenda that has the resolution. Here we go, 7. Thank you. Okay, so the first one is the annual report. So 13.2.1 in the agenda just needs to note, it does say NRSBU annual report, but it is the NTRLBU business unit annual report. So, this is a historic record of what has taken place. You'll see that we did have 3.6, 3.7. You'll see that there was a decent surplus, but at 6.6 and 6.8, you'll see what that surplus is being used for. So that probably closes that loop, and everything else is, of course, a historic record. So I'm happy to move the recommendation. It's been moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Courtney. Are there any questions on this matter? You are receiving an annual report. Hope you've all read it, understood how important the Regional Landfill Business Unit is. Absolutely critical service, and it is a great read because we have done some significant work and some amazing emissions reduction work. So if you haven't read it, please do. It's fantastic. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just want to thank you very much for the work that you've been doing to lead up that group and the members of the group. It is a sizable piece of work that just goes on behind the scenes, but it does represent a significant role for elected members, those of you who are sitting on these groups.
Madam Mayor, Mayor Rachel, I'm so pleased that you mentioned our chair because she has done, Councillor Edgar has done a fantastic job. Totally enthused about it. And we've made great progress under her being in the chair. And so, no, I enjoy it. The staff there are absolutely fantastic, each and every one of them. Our officers from TDC and Nelson City Council there too are totally embroiled in the work of this business unit, and it's making great progress. It's so important that they're looking at the emissions that come from there. 80% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the landfill, and they are working on it. They are working on it. They've got all sorts of options and ways they might use the gas going into the future. So it's a great business unit, in my view.
Thank you. I'm getting ready to put the motion. Just acknowledging and thank you, Councillor Corney, the staff that work in this area. And I just want to really commend the way that the business unit operates. It's a real teamwork, with the staff and elected members really working in a very collaborative way, and that's delivered results, and that's evident when you look at the results in the annual report. So please pass on our thanks to Nathan and his team. Absolutely will. Thank you. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. There was an amendment. Oh, was there an amendment? That was there.
Just an addition that's subject to the approval of Tasman District Council.
Oh, they've already done it.
Further down.
That's further down. That one. That's all right. That's coming up. All right, we're now going to pause. I can see that the minister has arrived, so I'll just go and say hello, and we'll welcome the minister through. So we'll just take an adjournment from our meeting. I'll ask the minister if he's happy for us to continue.
May I ask a question of the Deputy Mayor, seeing Madam Mayor's stepped away?
Have you here in the chamber. We've got to know each other a little bit over the last couple of months. And thank you very much for the support you've been giving our region through the emergency event. It's been really appreciated by all of the council as a whole organisation, both the staff and the elected members, and also by our community. They've really appreciated the way that you have, engaged, got to the heart of what the issues are and given this region support. So I just want to personally thank you. It's not an easy task, and as Minister of Emergency Management, unfortunately you're going to be one of the busiest ministers, I think, sitting in cabinet, because these emergencies aren't going away. They're just one after another. But you're here today wearing multiple hats. Yeah. And in fact, I think there's been something the Prime Minister's really talks this through. Having a Minister of Emergency Management and an Associate Minister of Transport and Local Government actually feels like the perfect trifecta for actually the engagement that we need to have. And as we start to think more and more about climate resiliency, we just appreciate the fact that you've got those portfolios and you're going to be able to weave those together. So thank you. So I'll let you introduce your team. Some of them we know quite well, but
yeah,
welcome.
Thank you, and kia ora tātou, good day everyone. It's really great to be here. Well, thank you. Yes, council number 52 of my tour of 55 rural and provincial councils, dotted around a few emergency management responses as well. And may I just start before I introduce the team by acknowledging actually your leadership as well, Your Worship, and the support that the council has given the community here. I think it's been a standout, frankly. There's no doubt that the weather event impacted Nelson and Tasman and Marlborough significantly. And from what I've observed, the way that the council and the civil defence teams here have stood up, I think is testament to your commitment to the community. And I just wanted to start by acknowledging that. And I was going to say that regardless of whether you started off with your very nice welcome. So thank you. I'm
just going to cover off a little procedural matter to make sure that we are not live streaming at the moment. Is that correct? No, we're off live streaming today. So just because we're doing an informal briefing, so we're going to do that. Thank you.